Continuing with our discussion about selections, I want to point out something called isolation mode inside of Illustrator. I'm working with a document called isolation.ai, which is available in the Chapter 1 folder. So in the last movie, we essentially learned that you can select an object with the selection tool, but you can select individual components with the direct selection tool. And if we take a look at this logo, we can see that it's made up of several different parts. And like the last movie, where we were looking at the cars, because it's made up of several different parts, the artist grouped all of those parts together. Under the Object menu, you'll notice that there's a Group command. All you have to do is have several different objects. So in this case, I'm drawing out a couple different shapes. With each of these shapes selected, so in this case, all three shapes, you would just come up to the Object menu, and from there you would choose Group. When you group them together, no matter which one of these shapes you select, you're essentially selecting all three. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. But what I want to point out, like I said, is something called isolation mode. You'll notice right now I have the selection tool highlighted. Let's say we wanted to select these mountains. We know if we click once, we're just selecting the grouped object. However, if we double-click, when we double-click, we enter into isolation mode. At this point, you can see that we're inside the group. So what does that mean? Well, again, I still have the selection tool highlighted, but you'll notice I can select individual components of this piece of artwork. But what I'm interested in doing is changing a particular component. Let's say these mountains. Well, with these mountains selected, if I really wanted to go in and modify this, of course you could come over and choose the direct selection tool, but better still is to double click it again. When you double click it again, you're isolated just to that object. And you can see that up here towards the top, that we're now inside of another group. And if I click on the mountains, we've isolated just that portion of the logo. Isolation mode is very similar to working with symbols inside of Flash. Of course, if you don't use Flash, that's not a very helpful reference, but nevertheless, you have the ability to drill down into specific components of a larger piece of artwork. To get back to where you were, you have a couple different options. You can step through step by clicking this back one level button. Notice right now I'm in the nested group, but if I click this button, I'm back to the original group. And of course I can click again to get back to the main document. Again, if you go ahead and double click, you enter the group. If you continue to double click on specific elements, you drill down further into those elements. If you want to go directly back to the document, you can do that simply by clicking on the document here within this breadcrumb structure. One thing that I do want to point out, new users sometimes will be confused by this structure. And what I mean by that is they'll double click by accident. And in this case, they're in isolation mode for the overall grouped element. If they start creating additional artwork, thinking that they're within the document, they'll cause problems because they're really inside of this group. So when you're working with grouped objects and you're working in isolation mode, just be extra careful to be aware of where you are inside of the document. Make sure you're not drilled down into a group if your intention is to create artwork within the main document.